If parents don't start taking sex education into their own hands, then schools, social media, porn, and OnlyFans will do your job for you. Hey guys, it's your boy Buck Says, back again for another video this week. Here we have the difficult conversations no one else in society is seemingly having. Thank you for the support in the last video, and with lots of new viewers I'm sure come lots of younger viewers, and if you are under the age of 15, please click away or get your parents' permission to watch this video before doing so, as we're going to discuss some adult themes. So we need to talk about sex, and we need to talk about sex in a more open and positive manner. I get the sentiment that sex is spoken about enough in society at the moment, and there's enough exposure to it, but there's not enough exposure to it in a positive manner. Over the last few years, I've seen various articles about wanting to opt their children out of sex education, and I've seen petitions gain over 100,000 signatures, conversations in the Houses of Parliament, and mainly, I only see it through a lens of my own culture, so I'll speak about it again from my own cultural lens. But a lot of people, I myself have got a 12-year-old brother, I've got lots of, cousins, etc., and it's a very awkward thing to have to face as children grow up, but they do need the education, and I think we need to teach our kids how to think, not what to think, right? And how we do that is by educating them. So I think that, completely brushing it aside and not wanting to talk about these things or not wanting to talk about the topic is probably one of the highest form of neglect, if I'm being honest. Looking at an article in question, I've linked in the description. There's some points parents are protesting around. I'll try to deconstruct some of these points. The first one is letting kids be kids. Listen, at the highest level, I wish we lived in a world where we could let kids be kids and we can allow them to preserve their innocence for as long as possible. We live in a less than ideal world, a world where abuse is rife, a world where consent is not always respected. And how do we teach kids about boundaries, about what forms abuse can take, whether that's physical, verbal, sexual? How do we teach them about it if we don't educate them? I don't really understand that. Most sexual abuse takes place within the family, so we need to be teaching these things. The other things include, let kids be kids is silly, because most kids currently are one step away from being tech support at a Fortune 500 company, and we allow kids unfettered access to laptops, iPads, iPhones, and with those come big danger. 70% of the net is currently porn. There's incognito mode. You really can't control everything your kids do, especially when a lot of the devices I see don't even have effective parental locks on them. So, letting kids be kids when it's for your own comfort, and then asking kids not to be kids when, it goes against your ideals and your values and the ability to have difficult conversations. It seems pretty hypocritical in that regard, right? WhatsApp, Snapchat, Instagram, Twitter, all these things. They use sex to market their platforms, very much so, to market the product, and the product does become your child. And so to not be up in arms about that, which a lot more kids use that without the education around that. And there should be education for both, don't get me wrong. It shouldn't just be that. There should be education on some of these insidious apps, or there should be education on sex only. There should be education on all facets of life. Like I said, teach your kids how to think, not what to think. The second point, educate, don't indoctrinate. Listen, I don't agree with everything in the curriculum, man. I think that if you don't agree with it, that's completely fine. Kids should probably be taught certain things at a later age than earlier ages, but I don't think that dialogue can exist if you completely don't engage in it whatsoever. I think the way you want to kind of adapt to what your kid can learn, or you want your kid to learn a certain thing, is by having open and honest conversations with teachers, with your child. I'm not a parent again, so I can't speak to how I would be. I'll probably come back and react to this later on in my life. But I will say relinquishing control is something that I struggle with. But if you don't want someone to teach your child, that's fine. My suspicion is that the people that don't want their children to be taught in school would not be very proactive about teaching their children in private anyway. I think they try to parlay the problem later on onto their life, to their own children really, to educate themselves, and that's not an effective solution. Really and truly, we need to take hold of it, right? I personally, there's certain things that may make people uncomfortable. A male teacher teaching your daughter about sex, a female teacher teaching your son about sex. These are uncomfortable things, right? And maybe you want your wife to teach your daughter about sex, or your husband to teach your son about sex. Maybe, maybe it's not so limited to those gender identities, but I'm just saying to you that I get the point around relinquishing control, but we seem to be very comfortable indoctrinating our kids with cultural norms, beliefs, and a value set that we align to ourselves and are very comfortable in. When you choose to have kids, you choose to have difficult conversations. You choose to teach them about difficult things, and sex is one of those difficult things that kids need to learn about because it's instrumental to their development. Confusion is the last point. Don't confuse our kids. Listen, kids have never been as confused as they are today in society. Their place in society, their friends, living in a Western country, trying to adopt Eastern values, the pressures of social media, the pressures of being cool, just the pressures of getting good grades, the pressures of earning good money. Kids are now more confused than they've ever been. And by not teaching them about sex education, we add to their confusion even further. Can you imagine our parents and our parents' parents never taught our parents about sex. The first time a lot of our parents had any sort of exposure to sex was on their wedding night. Can you imagine how confusing that is? So a lot of people are a lot of people were very confused about sex. In fact, I think a lot of the people that don't want their kids taught about sex probably had sex themselves before, and they're neglecting their kids, because I think a lot of it is taking the insecurities that you have about you from your own experiences and then parlaying them onto your child, thinking that they're destined to repeat the same mistakes that you are going to make. Listen, sex education is instrumental. It's instrumental around teaching kids about abuse. It's instrumental about teaching kids about protection. Instrumental about teaching kids about self-worth. Another thing is self-worth. How are kids meant to make meaningful relationships in life? Meaningful, loving relationships, if you don't teach them that sex is a very loving exchange between two respecting, consensual adults. How are you supposed to understand that as a child if you're never taught it? And this leads to lots of behavioral issues, behavioral identity crisis. People don't equate that. And then if you don't do it, if you don't teach your child that, someone else will. I remember the first exposure I had to sex was when I was growing up. Someone bought a printout of a Playboy spread of a WWE diva into the school playground. The objectification of women. When you're young and processing that and your brain doesn't know how to process it, you probably process it in the worst possible way. Like I said to you, pornography takes up 70% of the internet right now. I had exposure to pornography when I was younger. Did that skew me from friends, etc.? It's not a good thing, because you get used to this thing. Pornography is the craziest thing, because I think it exists only because we don't have those conversations in the first place. We are able to market sex because it is so taboo. By having these conversations, we make it even more taboo, and we allow people to market sex in the most insidious and disgusting ways, right? Sex, or porn at least right now, objectifies women. Now imagine if you're a man watching that growing up, right? As a kid developing into a young adult, developing then into an adult, going on to have relationships. You see the objectification of women, and that becomes normalized. As a woman, seeing the objectification of a woman, seeing the objectification of your kid and thinking that that's normal, it's not allowing you to form healthy attachments, a healthy relationship with sex. And imagine your heroes, your parents, ignoring the thing that made you in the first place, ignoring their responsibility to educating you. That is neglect. It's neglect, ignoring such a big facet of life, which is something that continues to sustain life, right? And I think part of the problem is that people use their religious beliefs to justify not having difficult conversations. Sex before marriage is haram in Islam. Sex education is not. Islam is a very pro-sex religion. It's a proponent of sex education. In fact, there are many hadiths that talk about the satisfaction that man and woman should derive in equality from sex. By giving our kids confidence to come to us and ask us questions, it makes the subject much less taboo, and it means they're less likely to engage in it in reality. My wife and I had lots of obstacles on being together, and the more taboo people made it around us, the more likely we were to engage and want to be together. Now we're married, so that tells you everything you need to know. I think that when you have kids, you choose to have difficult conversations. When you have kids, you commit to teaching your kids what to think, not how to think, and that's what Bucks has to say for this week.